everybody. My name is Ted Kerr. That was a clip of New York-based AIDS activists occupying Cuomo's office, asking him to do his job and make sure that we have what we need to end AIDS now. I'm a writer and an organizer and a co-host of this new conversation series, A Time to Listen. This program is presented by the New York AIDS Memorial, which was conceived of as a place to honor all the people in New York City who have died with HIV, as well as commemorate and celebrate the efforts of caregivers and activists in our ongoing response. The memorial had planned a new on-site project for spring 2020 called Hear Me, Voices of the Epidemic. It was conceived of as a sound installation. Hear Me will be made up of audible moments from the historical and ongoing response to AIDS in New York City, from oral history to news clips, from found footage to dance songs, and a lot more. This project is currently on temporary pause due to the COVID-19 crisis. However, the postponement is a fine thing. It's provided us with the time and space to delve deeper into how we find and choose and curate content for the installation from both a historical perspective and contemporary sources, resulting in this, A Time to Listen. The memorial hopes to install Hear Me this fall 2020, and of course, we'll keep you posted as the installation is confirmed. In the first episode of A Time to Listen, host Dave Harper broached the subject of speeches with Ann Northrup and Kenyon Farrow. Today, we want to hear more about activism, specifically direct action. And to do that, I am joined by two amazing activists, Kiara St. James and Jason Walker. Jason and Kiara, please open your mics and your cameras. There you are, Jason. Nice to see you.
See you as well today.
And there's Kiara. Hi, Kiara. So what we're going to do today is we're going to get to know you a little bit as activists through some clips that I've found, which I think are some good examples of audio activism or activism that we can hear together online. And that'll be a way we get to know each other. And then we'll listen to some clips together and discuss. So to start, I'm going to read a little bit about each of you, but also just share some more up-to-date stuff. So Kiara St. James has been a community organizer and public speaker for over 20 years. She has been instrumental in changing discriminatory shelter policies that affect the trans community and has presented workshops concerning marginalized communities at the International AIDS Conference in Vienna, Austria, and at the United Nations, and many other places, including other conferences and academic institutions. Kiara is the founder and current executive director of the New York Transgender Advocacy Group. And among her many amazing accomplishments, she was instrumental in the passage of GENDA in 2019. And for me, what I want to say is also since the start of COVID, Kiara's online presence has been so important to me. You've been infusing it with spirituality and activism, holding us accountable in all these beautiful ways through posts and also through such healing messages. So thank you for that. How are you doing today, Kiara? Oh, we can't hear you. Make sure you got your mic on for us.
Sorry. So I'm taking it one day at a time. I think we all are, just all the uncertainties of the world. One of my accomplishments I'm really proud of is I'm learning how to twerk. So I just want to put that out there. So, but yeah, I'm glad to be part of this conversation.
Amazing. So I'm going to play this clip. And it's a short film that you made for the Transgender Law Center. And it was made 2 years ago. And I think it gives us a really beautiful introduction about what activism can be and also your brilliance. So everyone mute your...
I have learned not to come to the table as a victim. At Positive Health Project, I found my voice to verbalize the various traumas that I had experienced at Ward's Island, a homeless shelter in New York City. Their quick, coordinated action on my behalf resulted in an immediate change in conditions, and my activism was born. To be unapologetically Black, trans, and HIV empowered in a world that does everything to erase our existence is a radical act. Our resilience in a world that says that Blackness and trans is equal to all things bad speaks volumes to how every time we compromise our authenticity, we lose. Our communities continue to experience a slow death on a daily basis, now to be documented in every minute detail. Justice for the Black trans woman has been hollow at best. Ours is a fight that is just. Our bodies have been commodified by school to prison pipelines. We must start to put our efforts into an intentional and more fulfilling community building by practicing a more compassionate and transformative justice. Settling for scraps keeps us all vassals of a corrupt corporate state. We have a duty and a responsibility to protect who we call family and community. We are born into this world as whole and complete beings who are intentionally made to feel less. To be unapologetically Black and trans is to be proud and determined. It is not our duty to perform for anyone, smile, or make ourselves conform to a narrative that we do not benefit from. But it is our universal right to dare to strive and achieve in a world where we weren't meant to survive. And boldly say, our Blackness is not a badge of shame, but a gift to the world, to show that out of the ashes comes our rebirth. We are here.
Facing the rising sun.
Sing it, Etta
Yes. Begun.
Yes.
Let us march on till victory.
Mics and talk about it. Kiara, thank you for making that film and putting that in the world. Somebody listening to it might not hear the word HIV or AIDS, but I wonder if you want to talk about it. How is this beautiful film you made an example of AIDS activism?
Yeah, so thank you, Theodore. I wanted to, and I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to someone about like my transition out of like being the face of HIV, right? And how I talked about it is like oftentimes people would call me and they would say, Kiara, me and my colleagues were talking about a Black trans woman who was murdered and so, and we thought about you. And I'm like, okay, so when you think about trans women, Black trans women being murdered, you think of Kiara, like, you know, and so like it's the same thing with HIV. And so like I really think it's important. Like my narrative is not one that I am a HIV long-time survivor. My narrative is one that I am an empowered, HIV-empowered Black trans woman who I bring all of my intersectionality into this work. And so I will not be pigeonholed, you know, into one specific type of narrative that does not affirm me or my community, you know. And so that's why I wanted to like really address like systemic, even like one of the reasons why I co-founded NITAG was to address systemic racism, homophobia, transphobia. Like it's not one specific issue that I'm here fighting and that we're here fighting, but it's several, right? And so, yeah, and I really wanted that video that was recorded in Oakland, California 2 years ago to really speak that, you know, I do believe that we have an opportunity, especially now with COVID-19, to not be in these boxes, right? And like really like, no, well, this is connected to this. Like the reason why we're here is because of capitalism, right? Nobody wants to talk about capitalism and how that's evil, right? But capitalism only benefits the few. And I'm interested in having all of those conversations. You know, like a couple of weeks ago, you know, LGBTQ folks across the nation were celebrating a Supreme Court victory, right? That stated that it is illegal to fire employees simply because of our sexual orientation and gender identity, right? But that's also rooted in Black liberation, right? Because they took their decision from the 1964 Civil Rights Voting Act. So it speaks to the fact that we live in a nation that really diminishes Black bodies, Black magic, Black intellectual property, but still at the same time use what my ancestors fought to benefit everyone. And I'm interested in having those conversations, right? And so that's one of the reasons why that video is what it is.
That's amazing, and we're having those conversations today. I want to introduce Jason now. Jason Walker is a nationally recognized public health activist organizing within the intersection of Black queer liberation. Currently working as Health Gap's Senior Coordinator of Grassroots Advocacy, Jason is growing and building US-based grassroots power to advance and win campaigns to ensure equal and equitable access to health and wellness services for low-income communities across the world. Formerly from Vocal, New York, Jason gained his notoriety in AIDS activism by bringing together thousands of New Yorkers living with HIV and won policies to ensure that low-income people living with HIV access medically appropriate, affordable housing and ongoing financial support. And Jason, similarly, since the beginning of COVID, I've seen you be online making connections, but also making sure that you're staying in touch with people as much as you can. And I love how often you say win in your bio. It just is like, we are in it to win it. So I just want to say hi and welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Okay. So the clip that I have for you is, it's a little clip from this film that we're both in. I'm just going to read my notes here. It's called A Place in the City, and it's directed by Nate Lavey and Stephen Vitter. And in this clip, it's following our friend Wanda Hernandez Park, but this part that we're going to watch is you explaining an action. So everyone mute your mics, we'll play it, and then we'll come back and discuss.
The thing is that we want to be talking about ending homelessness through creating progressive tax policies.
So yeah, and I think it's also very important if we're talking to organizations who are AIDS service providers, how this impacts like folks living with HIV/AIDS. When folks have access to stable housing and not in a shelter setting, but like stable housing of their own, whether that's in supportive housing or in the private market, their health outcomes improve. Folks are more likely to go to the doctors on time, more likely to achieve viral suppression, more likely to use harm reduction services, whether that's clean syringes or condoms or PrEP. So housing is healthcare for folks living with HIV and AIDS. And if we're going to end the AIDS epidemic in New York State, we need to have this platform passed.
Cut the crime and the greed, give the homeless what they need. Cut the crime and the greed, give the homeless what they need. Cut the crime and the greed, give the homeless what they need.
If you remain in the roadway and refuse to utilize the sidewalk, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. This is the New York City Police Department. You are unlawfully in the roadway and obstructing vehicular traffic. You are ordered to leave the roadway and utilize the available sidewalk. If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you remain in the roadway and refuse to utilize the sidewalk, you will be placed under arrest and charged with disorderly conduct. This is the New York City Police Department.
Here, but the last line of that clip is somebody yelling, "We ain't leaving." And I think a testament to that is your ongoing work, Jason. Do you want to say a little bit about that clip and any memories you have of it?
Yeah, I remember that day. I remember that action. I definitely remember getting arrested. That clip is for me, like I haven't seen it in so many years. It feels like forever now. But that clip really just kind of like regrounds me and just like, hey, we have to continue to focus on those folks who are most oppressed by oppressive systems, right? homeless folks, drug users, our seniors, in our work and efforts to dismantle systems of oppression, really requires those who have been shaped by oppression, right? In order to help dismantle those systems.
Yeah, it's really.
Yeah.
Was there something you wanted to add?
No, I just had to take this.
Okay. What I think both of you bring to the movement is this ear for what the people need to hear, and you're speaking from the people's perspective. And sometimes in your generosity, you know that there's some good folks with power, maybe, we can talk about that. But sometimes they have to have things explained to them. It's not that the people who are being oppressed need things explained to them. It's that the people who are clutching their power need things explained to them. And Kiara, you're somebody who I've seen do this in so many generous ways. And there's this beautiful clip from the National AIDS Memorial Oral History Project that they did last year. And in the most beautiful way, you really break down some ideas. So let's watch that now. So everyone mute your mics and we'll watch this clip.
I've always been involved in HIV advocacy from the time that I heard about HIV and AIDS. I had an uncle who passed away from HIV, but I remember when he was really sick, I was one of the few people that was not scared to take care of him. So it really just really resonated with me that, that HIV is something that I may have to deal with one day, and I needed to really get involved in that work. And so I got involved with ACT UP. I was one of the few Black queer person in ACT UP, especially when I was in Atlanta, Georgia. Wasn't too many Black folks who were involved just because Black folks were too busy living their daily lives and didn't have the time like our white counterparts did. The New York Transgender Advocacy Group was founded back in 2014, and it came out of a need for trans women, particularly of color, to have a place to center policies. Too often what I found was that oftentimes when folks talked about specifically Black trans women, it was these cascades of 1 out of 2 Black trans women is HIV positive, but not giving really context of why that is. And so if we're not addressing policies, we're going to continue to see those cascades and those disparities remain the same. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with are not going to be resolved by simply HIV testing and passing out condoms. There has to be a nuanced approach to each community. The African American community is different than the Caribbean American community. It's different from the Latinx community. There has to be an understanding of how historical trauma has impacted our community and how that shows up in how we have agency over our bodies. So if you're dealing with trauma and depression, you're not likely to care about using a condom or not. Housing, employment, and health are very important to the trans community. But how we look at employment has to be different. So it's not the traditional 9-to-5 type of employment. A lot of trans women, especially here in New York City, are already on various type of SSD, HASA, which is an enhanced type of welfare for people living with HIV. So they're penalized whenever they make over $400 a month. Employment is very hard for folks who have been discriminated. They are not used to structure. And so a lot of people want to create this back to work type component to getting services, but they're not really thinking about a pre-job training program, understanding how to address triggers and how triggers may show up for TGNC folks of color. Most folks who are engaged in sex work, they are doing it because it's something that validates them and empowers them. It gives them agency over their bodies, over their lives. Some other reasons why trans women engage in sex work is just lack of opportunities. When you have a lack of opportunities where you can go and fill out a job application and they're looking at your application and looking at you and laughing and then throwing it in the trash can in your face, you're not likely to go to another job to fill out because you're not, like, why? So sex workers must be uplifted. Black trans women who engage in sex work, that is not a bad thing. It gives them agency over their lives, and that is something that we should be respecting. It's something that we should be protecting. So sex workers don't need to be rescued. You probably heard this before. They need protections. They need support. So we need to make sure that we're doing that.
It cut off there for a second, but I love that line, accepting and protecting. So beautiful. I wonder if you want to share a little bit. To me, what's amazing about that clip, besides the information you're sharing, is I want you to speak a little bit about who did you understand was your audience? Like, who are you speaking to in that moment?
Yeah, so I was really speaking to like potential funders, community at large, elected officials, really getting them to understand that, addressing root causes. Like, people don't wind up being HIV, homeless simply because they're Black or trans or Black and queer, right? It's because of policies. It's because of like historical trauma and how that shows up and how resources are not available to us to have access to the same way that our white counterparts do, right? And so I really felt it was important to have that conversation as opposed to like the woe is me. Like I've always tried to be solution focused and like, well, how do we go about it? And I think that's was really important, and I think that was last year. That was like, I think that was in July. Because I was getting ready to go on vacation, so I was rushing through that. We're in July of this year, and we still see the same shit, right? It's been compounded, but at the same time, I do feel like this is a great opportunity to push forward these initiatives that me and Jason have been talking about for so many years, and like what Jason talked about in that clip you showed of him and Joanza was. Reallocating police funds, right? Like tax the rich, right? And that's what we're talking about. And I do feel like people are understanding that a lot better now because of our current state. And so, so I do feel like there is a consistency in our message, mine and Jason, and it speaks to the urgency that we now find ourselves in today.
Cut out. I'm blaming, let's get conspiracy theory and say I got cut off. Jason, were you trying to jump in? Well, you're muted.
Okay, much better. Just wanted to build upon what Kiara mentioned and like the fight against like this, like the HIV/AIDS pandemic, or any pandemic would be by focusing on alleviating the realities of poverty within our communities. And that the alleviation of poverty in any public health initiative must be community driven. It must be community approached. That communities must be in control of the narrative of public health. And that's going to be the best ways in which we're able to be able to address the HIV/AIDS pandemic, to address any other public health issues as they occur. And we know that like through pandemics, whether it's HIV, COVID, that the communities who are most harmed are communities of color, communities who are criminalized, right? Essentially criminalized communities. Communities are criminalized because of their behavior. Communities are criminalized because of their socioeconomic status. Communities who are criminalized because of their performance and even jobs. So, really just uprooting this criminality aspect of our society will be really key and fundamental to addressing the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So just building upon.
And you did the best introduction to your own clip. So there was this conference a few years ago that was looking at like the need for HIV grassroots activism. And sometimes people say activism, but we know that that term has been co-opted. So what does grassroots AIDS activism look like? So we're going to show this clip, and it's with you, it's Shay Gossett, it's Amani Henry, it's JD Davids, and you're all speaking in this project that Hope Doctorow and Dean Spade put together. So let's mute our mics and watch your second clip, Jason.
How do we create structures that make it possible for people living with HIV and people who are in deep with HIV for some reason or another to be able to be a part of these movements and shaping them?
Different nonprofits who are really being experimental about like the shape that they take. So like, for instance, having a board membership that is made up of like members of your base, and also like collectivizing the pay. So thinking of things like that as ways to restructure it, or consensus-based decision making instead of having an ED. So those are like structural things that feel important.
When the leadership is in the hands of the people most impacted, the agenda is completely different.
And this can include also being able to be in these movements as someone who's out about living with HIV, who's out about using or having used drugs. If these movements are not a home for the people who are in it the most deeply with HIV/AIDS, what world are we creating?
ACT UP Resurgence is really inspiring to me, where like ACT UP in its beginning kind of privileged and prioritized like prominently like non-trans white gay men, and so there's been a shift around like who's at the table now and what issues are being brought up.
What Vocal tends to do is like our board is comprised of our membership, right? We do membership and leadership development. So with our members, with our core, with our base, we go into the community and help build leadership and that empowerment to really help them get the advocacy and the empowerment that they need to take ownership of their oppression in order to help dismantle it. And the ways in which we do that is we really get them on board, in a literal sense, get them on our board, and to really help shape the direction of our advocacy, to really help shape the direction of our campaigns and to shape the structure of our organization. That's everything from hiring of staff up into which shall our campaigns or issues be in the upcoming years, right? And I find that some of these bigger boards, they have people, Dr. So-and-so with MBA, MPA, and all these extra letters at the end of their name. And these are people who comprise their board. And they usually have a single space that they call client representative or consumer representative or community representative. And this is one space out of like the 12 spaces of people who tend to probably often dominate the conversation, right? And I think oftentimes they devalue the voices of the clients or the voices of the people directly impacted. And we try to promote those voices. That's why they are saturated in our board, right? We wanted to make sure that our board fit our community and fit the work that we're doing. And I feel like strategically those nonprofit organizations pick these high profile individuals or these individuals with high credentials because these are people that they feel like are connected to donors, connected to funders, connected to politicians, and these are things that they can use to help push their agenda, right? But are those agendas really the real agenda of the people that we are trying to serve, right? And there's a question, are we trying to serve this population or are we trying to empower this population, right? And I think that's the distinction between organizations that do what I will call like grassroots. The true meaning of grassroots seeks to empower these communities, where nonprofits, these big industrialized nonprofits, seeks to serve these individuals and serve these communities. And I think those are the key distinctions.
Hey, welcome back. What the viewers at home couldn't see is that we were all like, it was like we were watching a sports event and we were like clapping and snapping. And Jason, I want to just ask you, what does it feel like to kind of hear your own voice? What does it, you're getting a chance to watch yourself. What were you thinking while you were watching your brilliance?
I was like, that boy's good. Well stated. And still very true. Like we still need to ensure that we have representation of folks who have an experience with a particular struggle. that experience with a particular struggle or sets of struggle helps informs how we want to see the world. Those things are invaluable and actually critical to one, critical discourse, and to really envisioning what type of society we want to live in. So it's really, really very important that we elevate, we center on folks who have experiences of being oppressed, of like what I like to prefer to say, of struggling, right? Like what's the struggle? And we all have a struggle, right? But when we actually own our struggles and center on that, they actually become they actually can be elevated to be our success. It's how do you use your platform how do you use your oppression to be your platform in order to like speak truth to power to begin the process of dismantling it? That's why it is so critically important to, what we like to say, don't shun the struggle, embrace it, in order to help inform the world that we want to all live in. Because even though like I may not particularly like I struggle with the same everyday live experiences of trans women, I know for a fact that the dismantling of that oppression is going to be liberatory to me as well. It's going to like help advance the world that I want to live in because we share the same values. And one of the things that like, you know, folks living with HIV/AIDS, we often think of it as like like a white issue and like different type of issues, but really the connection of how folks have treated people with HIV historically, particularly like within community and even in government, right? Helps inform what kind of society we want to live in. We have to connect those stories of struggles if we want to actually live in a world that actually works and supports and sustains and is healthy and healing to all of us.
Kiara, I want to ask you the same question. What was it like for you to witness your own brilliance? You know, you're in a different headspace right now. You're sitting in your apartment, but back when you watch that clip, you're watching you as an activist. And I'm wondering does your power work on you?
No, I'm very critical of myself when I see videos of me. But I do feel that what I speak is the truth, you know, and I really want to say, I feel that's more important than anything for me. I just know that I should say me, my therapist taught me to say, start focusing on, so I'm gonna say me. This journey is a very nuanced journey for me, right? Also the fact that oftentimes we don't talk about like ageism, like we don't talk about ageism, right? And ageism is a real issue in social justice spaces. And so when I think and look at videos of me talking, but I'm also in spaces with other up and coming leaders, you know, in their 20s, and they're like, oh, well, you had your opportunity, now it's our time. And then it's like, well, no, actually everything that we're fighting for, like you probably see me having access today, but I didn't always have access to these things. And I can say like probably in the last 5 years since I co-founded NITAG, I have a little bit more access, right? And so I really think it's really important that any conversations that I want to be a part of, I try to be thoughtful and nuanced, because I want it to be something to where we're not just talking about it today, right? But there's solutions that we're talking about, and we can have as part of our plan of getting to that equitable world that we all want to live in. And so, yeah, so I don't really like, oh, yeah, that was brilliant, Kiara. I'm like, I should have worded it differently, right? But, yeah.
I mean, I think that's an important point. The idea of the sound of progress should be ongoing. And sometimes we can't always bear witness to our own brilliance. So that's why we need community to help each other see how amazing we are. Something else that I think is helpful is knowing that we did not start yesterday, and this movement did not start with this conversation. And one thing I want to invite us to do right now is watch this relatively long clip. It comes from 1991. And in New York City during Stonewall, there was a gathering of Two-Spirit people to talk about HIV. And so in this clip, we're going to see a little bit of marching, and then we're going to hear a variety of Two-Spirit people talking about HIV, but in the way that we're talking about it now, from a holistic point of view. And then when we get back from that clip, let's just talk about what we heard and how that felt. So let's mute our mics and listen to that together.
As far as the eye can see,
I'm a Native American lesbian. I was diagnosed in November of '86 with AIDS-related condition, and then in November of '87 I was diagnosed with AIDS and almost died, and Western medicine gave me 6 weeks to live, and I turned really in a major way to traditional Native resources and began a 3-year healing process.
The crisis that Aboriginal people on Turtle Island are facing is one that can wipe us out if we continue to practice ignorance and hysteria around this disease that is affecting our people. The disease is showing up to being transmitted more so in the heterosexual community, where I come from, and that's frightening information, that's frightening news, because the heterosexual community is still in a great state of denial about who we are as two-spirit people, about themselves and the healing that they need to do.
One of the things that's happening is that, and has happened over the years, is that the dominant culture, the whites, their influence has really permeated all areas of our lives, and including our organizations in the past. And I think there's been a turnaround, and there needs to be we need to double our efforts and to bring in a lot of our cultural-based teachings. For one thing, when you're dealing with people with HIV, also people in chemical dependency, you need to have a spiritual-based foundation. And my God, you know, I should say, and as I said, it's permeated all areas of our culture. I said it needs to be centered around a lot of our teachings, and it's got to be spiritual based. And a lot of times that's not happening. A lot of our organizations, a lot of our ideas are based on the white method of operating, and we need to change that around and recognize for once, you know, what we have is so valuable in our community that can help both people in HIV and are having problems with substance abuse.
When I think about the loss of the traditions of who we are as two-spirited people, very sacred people, medicine people, it hurts me because of the influence of European cultures and religions that had come to this continent and that had erased the teachings of who we are as two-spirited people. And I remember hearing the elders say that there's no wrong way to do things. There's only a way to learn. I do have brothers and sisters in that we're all struggling and we're all fighting for the same thing.
If I make a ribbon shirt, that is a political statement. That says to my oppressors, despite 500 years of your trying to kill my people, trying to kill my culture, my spirituality, I can still pick up that needle, and those 4 colors that I put on my back still mean something to me. If I pick up that sage and I talk to my creator, that is a political statement, because for 500 years people have been trying to take that away from us. And women play an integral part in that. In our community, they were the decision makers. They chose the leaders, and they chose the leaders not on the basis of election, but they went and they talked to the mothers of the people who are potential chiefs and said, how is he? Is he an impatient person? Is he a quick-tempered person? Is he gentle? Is he kind? Is he generous? And in that way, our women chose the future, chose our future leaders, and very definitely helped shape our future. My grandmother's made a decision 7 generations ago, and now it's my turn. And I think that's a powerful force within Native women.
When I went around to our Indian service agencies in our community, the first response was, we don't have Indians who shoot drugs. And it really scared me, because I realized at that point that the only way they're going to turn around and say that we do have this problem in our community was for the first person to enter the door. And I felt at that point that I needed to do my work, and so that the first person who was coming through that door wouldn't have to go through the difficulties of being misdiagnosed, of only using alcohol instead of using IV drugs. And so it's happened that first year I was able to network with 50 IVDUs in our community. And I went back to the Indian service agencies in our community and said, here are 50 that I have talked to. You tell me that we don't have this problem. And so I realized there was a lot of fear and denial. And over the last 2 years, I have reached over 200 folks within our community who are IVDUs or sexual partners of IVDUs. And also I've worked with high-risk adolescents as well, who have been a history of sex work, prostitution on the streets. So what I have to say that the crisis is there. The awareness very slowly is coming around the circle where people in our community are looking at the issue of IVDU and HIV. Also, the work that I do at reservations has been a slow process. But recently, with one of the reservations, the doors have opened, and we are looking very seriously at the IVDUs on our reservations as well.
We don't always see what the threat is around us, but if there are people out there who are watching, who are able to do something about things that threaten our communities, then we are going to protect the future generations and our children.
All of us have at different times experienced violence in our lives, either against ourselves as Indian people on the reservation, or maybe in the city, or we experience it as Indian women, or we experience it as lesbians and gay men, or we experience it within our relationships. And so it's very good to begin talking about all these things that have impact on us throughout our lives.
When I think about the action that's necessary, for our people is to begin to help other people break through their denial systems, organizations, communities, and individuals, and to talk about the fact that it's the coming back from this disease is not going to be just a prescription that you pick up at a drugstore. It means change of life. It means change of ways of looking at ourselves as two-spirit people, as Indian people, and as human beings on this earth as a whole, and beginning to respect each other in ways that we have not known for the last 500 years, and that the teachings that we pick up are not just teachings that we pick up for a day or two. This is a lifelong journey, and the recovery from this disease is going to be many lifetimes. Long after I'm gone, people will still be recovering from this disease.
There's so much power in that, so I just want to remind everyone that that is a clip from a 1991 gathering in New York City of two-spirit people from around the world here on Turtle Island to talk about HIV. And that footage comes to us from James Wency, a longtime AIDS activist who shot that and had production help from Curtis Harris. I just wanted to name that. And just first thoughts. Jason, what are some of your first thoughts on seeing that clip?
Heavy, powerful. There's a peaceful wisdom that Indigenous folks provide, and that's grounding, in reminding that understanding like how we understood ourselves as queer folks, in even like so it's a lot, right? So like, how do we understand ourselves as queer folks outside the politics, right? Of it, and understand the community of it and the communal relationship of it. I think when we say community a lot, without recognizing communal, right? Like what it means to actually be communal. with each other and to each other for our sustainability and for our collective work and efforts. Connecting it to HIV, how not necessarily HIV, but how government, right, impose their ideology of who people are, push people further into kind of like the margins, into kind of like silence, into this idea of like demonization of folks, right? Like this process of demonization is a political one. In like looking back at ancient and traditional and indigenous like wisdom, and that is revolutionary, that is radical, of like how we understand ourselves and how we understand how disease, right, is actually been a tool to oppress folks, right? Because this epidemic could have been long avoided if folks didn't demonize folks because of who they were. And so we have to understand that disease is a tool of oppression, and it's been a tool used politically and justifiably. And it must be resisted. And I love the fact that she talked about how using sage is a political revolution, like it's a political act, and how like working with your ancestors and working with the earth and working with your spirit is a form of like revolution as well. And that's something that will lead me forward. And yes, thank you.
Thank you. Kiara, what did you hear?
Yeah, pretty much the same thing. You know, I was thinking like, and I talk about this a lot. You know, you see my posts. You know, of course I post a lot. And so, who were you? Is a question I ask people. Who were you before they told you who you are, right? And I think that's something that Black and Indigenous folks have in common. Is oftentimes like we forget that we have a history that is thousands of years old, right? That transcends, in the case of like Jason and me, enslavement of our people, right? And so like those connections about when they were talking about the sage, I burn sage every day in my house, you know, but it also speaks to, like, I do believe diseases is like a way for capitalists to make money off of it, right? Like I've been very annoyed with the media, the white media, talking about first it was China, now it's Russia, how they're trying to steal the what you call it, the stuff for the vaccines for COVID-19, and so, but what they keep saying is which will end up in billions of dollars in loss, right? And I'm like, billions of dollars in loss to who? Not to us. We'll benefit from it, right? So even when media, white media, talking heads talk about, they make nations sinister, right? When every nation is fighting to find a vaccine, a cure, what I hear on white media, Western media, is, oh, that's billions of dollars they're stealing from us, right? And so like I get the picture. I see the picture. It's about us, right? It's not about living, breathing people, but it's about how can we make money. Look, you can if you want to censor this, go ahead. But how can we make money for Bill and Melinda Gates, right? How can we, you know, like, come on, you don't have that conversation, let's have it. But that's what so whether you're talking about HIV or COVID-19, I do feel that there is this sinister disposability that is attached to, like, even today, you know, we have a lot of governors, mayors saying, oh, get back to work, get back to work. You know, there's nothing to fear, but they're not speaking to us, right? They're speaking, you know, because in their mind, they're like, well, yeah, the main people dying, they're disposable anyway. And so, like, that's why I don't watch media. That's why I don't watch news. Like, I try not to, because I'll yell at the TV screen, because like no. But I think that's really important. And like, I really connected to the stories that they were telling, you know, about our ancestors and the fact that we were somebody before. Like even the fact that we have to say queer, right, or trans, that is because of Westernization and how we have been put into these boxes. Mm-hmm. Because before colonialization, not just of Europeans, but of Arabs, like these were like if you were queer or trans, we didn't have the term trans back then, but if you were queer, gender nonconforming, two-spirit, you were an integral part of those communities you came from, right? And today we're reduced to, I remember, we all probably hear this, like, the beauty of America is individualism. The beauty of America is, like, you can make it on your own. But we come from cultures that it's about community. It's about we have to support. Hillary Clinton, she appropriated it, right? It takes a village to raise a child. We come from that, right? But now we live in a society that says, no, rugged individualism is all you need. But like, no, that's maybe what you need, but you're not. But and that speaks to how. I'm getting very emotional. So that speaks to like when people say, "Oh, I'm colorblind. Oh, I believe in a colorblind society," or we're all in this together. Like, no, we're not all in this together. There's nuances to this shit, and they need to be addressed. And so, like, just seeing those stories, and I believe it was one of the Native Americans that was told, like, oh, there's not too many of you who are intravenous drug users, right? So another thing that came to mind is, who could we have been, right, if we had access to social media like we do today, to find our tribe, to find our community? And so I was thinking about that as well, like so many, because when I was coming of age, we didn't have the internet, right? So it was very easy for people to tell me, oh, what's wrong with you? Because, that ain't part of our culture, but now because of the internet, I'm like, I can Google, like, remember you said this wasn't part of our culture? Well, I Googled this, here, check it out. And so, like, all those components, I saw in that, like, to me, like, it speaks to the resilience of Native Americans, right? But also the sadness that existed during that time, because there was a lot of uncertainty. 1991, there were no retroviral medication, right? So how many of those folks that we saw in that clip are still here today, right? And so I think about that as well. So, yeah.
I cut out, but just as you were saying that, you were talking about how it was a different time, that there was no antiretrovirals, and how many of those people are still with us today. And something else I'm reminded of is that was, like you said, it was in 1991. That was even before the definition change that opened it up to include women, to include other opportunistic infections that included women, that included people who do who inject drugs. Like, you could have HIV and you could die with it, but you wouldn't even get an AIDS diagnosis. And so you're right. And the last clip I want to show is from a video from this time as well. It's from a year before. It's from 1990, and Haitian communities in New York came out en masse, and they took over the Brooklyn Bridge, and they were fighting the FDA's blood ban. And there's something both inspiring about watching this clip, because it's so amazing and it looks familiar, and then that's also heartbreaking. So let's watch this clip together, and let's hold in our hearts and our minds the brilliance that you two bring to this room, and that we've seen through your clips, the clips of the two spirit activists who spoke. And now let's watch this last clip. So let's mute our mics.
Our children are going to school here. We are paying our tax as everybody else. There is no reason why, without any pertinent data, they should put those things on Haitians.
The original stigma brought upon the Haitian community from the FDA caused us a great deal of embarrassment.
In addition to the thousands of community and student activists from the Haitian community, there were families with small children who came to Lower Manhattan to denounce the FDA's recent ruling.
We are Haitian people. Then they put on discrimination against us.
We are one. We are part of our people. The struggle of our people is just one. This is a duty for ourselves and for the whole Haitian community to be here and stand up and to say no to whatever they want to put on us.
And the children who suffered packed crowds in today's warm weather wanted their voices heard.
We do not give aid and stop the discrimination.
If you had something to say to the FDA, what would it be right now?
Don't blame the Haitians for what they do not do.
One healthcare worker who works in Brooklyn says the evidence linking Haitians and Africans to AIDS here in the U.S. does not hold up.
In your dealings in the hospitals, you don't see any large percentage of Haitians or Africans with AIDS here?
No, because you see AIDS in all colors, all nation, all nationality, whites, black, whatever country you come from, AIDS is all
And the
over.
Food and Drug Administration says they can't give blood in this country because of the threat of AIDS. Well, the Haitians say that's discriminatory, racist, and they're not going to accept that ruling lying down. So today they stood up and marched.
For some younger viewers to hear the chants that they are hearing in the streets right now, no justice, no peace, and to know that those chants are older than their bodies, right? From 1990, that clip is from. Kiara, I wonder if you want to start us off talking about this clip. When you watched it, what did you hear and what did those sounds do for you?
I feel like I have a special connection with the Haitian community. I've always admired their history of being the second oldest independent nation in the New World. But like growing up in East Texas, me and my family, my siblings, because we have, I don't know, features that are considered different. Like a lot of the black kids used to call us Haitians. They were like, we're not Haitian. You know, so and I remember like really feeling offended that people call us Haitian because of that stigma, right, as a child. That stigma attached to being related to a particular group. So I have a better understanding. What I do understand better now is the importance of how we see ourselves and the fact that we need to have media, control of media, autonomy of media, that is speaking to the nuanced identities that are part of our communities. And what I'm talking about is the fact that we live in a society that uplifts Kanye West, right? I'm like, how are we talking about Kanye West? But like, we live in a society that Hollywood dictates to black folks and to the rest of the world, oh, Kanye West, that's your leader, right? That's your, you know, and so when Kanye West goes off the, you know, off the charts with his acting out, people are like, oh, what happened? Like, what's going on? And it's like, because we allow certain people to tell us who our leaders are, who we should look up to, and when they disappoint us, we're pissed and we're mad, right? And so even like when it during that time, like a lot of the media, like where we got our news from was white media. We didn't get it from like BET, because if you had BET, you had to pay for it. Majority of black folks couldn't afford BET, right? So the only option was to watch regular news where we were demonized and pathologized as people. And I'm saying we, because, you know, I do feel like nobody really knows, unless I tell you I'm a native of East Texas, you probably assume that I'm Haitian, right? And I don't really care, because Haitians they have a phenomenal history, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of their history for them. And so when I see that clip, it just really resonates to me why it's so important, media, like control of our narratives through various social media platforms, so that when these lies are told, or the stigma is created, there's a counter narrative to say, well, wait a minute, no, just like Haitians, you don't get HIV because you're Haitian. You get HIV because you're sharing needles, unprotected sex. You know, like we have to have those type of media platforms where people, like whether you're LGBTQ, Black, Latinx, like we have to have our own media platforms to really take back our narrative. And so like what I saw in that is why Black media is important, right? Why Native American media is, like we have to have media that speaks specifically to what the issues is in our community, and also as a way of us having honest, real conversations with one another. That is not through an academic lens of, oh, gee, why do you think Haitians have a high rate of HIV? Yeah, like that was so egregiously wrong, but we all believed it for so long, right? And it took decades for them to really come out of that type of stigma attached to just being Haitian. And I knew so many Haitians who did not want to say they were Haitian out of that fear of being connected to HIV. And so that's the harm when we allow one specific entity to tell us who we are. And that's what I got out of that clip.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And let's keep that word narrative. I think we're going to come back to that in a second. Jason, for you, what did you hear?
I heard a pushback on a narrative, right? Like pushing back on a narrative that attempted to categorize a particular group of folks as like, hey, these folks you need to stay away from, right? These folks, not only you should stay away from, but these folks are a problem, right? They're the problem. And so like that, I heard that narrative there. What I also heard was a connection in my greater mind, right? Like a connection of like that's also true. I heard that similarly with two-spirited folks when they were talking about like that. I heard that in the halls of City Hall when we're talking about drug users and homeless folks, right? Hearing that when we talk about like trans folks, like we hear that like folks we need to stay away from, and that these are the folks who are the problem. And so the resistance or the pushback of the narrative is like, no, actually the problem is actually the problem is actually the people that are telling you I'm a problem, right? That's actually the problem. And so like that's what I'm hearing. I'm also hearing like the voice of young folks. I'm really feeling empowered in saying like, hey, like no, we don't, like this is not us, and stop saying that, right? So that's what I heard there.
Yeah, and there was such a beautiful thing in both of these clips that we watched where people were not being anti-HIV. They were really pushing back on blame. They were really pushing back on stigma.
Last year.
Pushing back on people living with the illness. And I really loved what the lady who was the nurse at the end said, like, I see HIV all the time. That's not what I'm here to activate around. Something that I think we can end on before we watch this fun thing that Jason brought us is one of the theories that I am working with, inspired by the work that both of you do, is that direct action activism, or activism more generally, is a form of narrative work. It is a form of like people's media work. Like when we gather in a space and we chant, that is media. When one of you makes a speech, even if it's not recorded, that is a type of broadcasting that gets to people's souls and changes our lives. So I just want to maybe, as a way to wrap up, I wonder if each of you can just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the role of giving voice to what you know as a form of activism.
Yeah, I can go. So, you know, I stand on the shoulders of so many warriors, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, you know, going back to Harriet Tubman and, you know, to our ancestors back in Africa, you know, and Kemet. And so what I've learned is like you kind of touched upon it, that a little bit, is that we're griots to a certain degree, right? We're in the traditions of Africans, they don't necessarily record and document, they speak through their actions. And so that is part of the community that we're a part of oftentimes, where our stuff is not documented for academic and to read and books. Some of it will be, you know, but I think that's really important, right? I think that's really important to acknowledge that, you know, a lot of the game changers in that we're going to see coming out of all these different uprisings due to COVID-19 lifting that veil of disparity are people who are sick and tired, who don't have degrees, right? Who are on the front lines. They're called the what? The essential workers, right? So those are going to be the game changers. And like, what I'm doing is not special from anything that they're doing or that the folks who came before me. And I think that I am me and Jason are part of a long history of what resilience looks like for the African liberation. I don't use the word struggle. Take struggle out your narrative. So out of the African liberation, right? And like I get so much of my energy because I'm a historian. Underneath my I have a lot of books underneath that. So like whenever I have that to rely on and see like, oh well, during the civil rights, like a lot of black folks didn't like Martin Luther King Jr. Right? Like there was all these factions that existed, but they get whitewashed today, right? Into where like everybody got along. Back in the day, we need to be like our aunts, be like them because they worked together. Like no, they had their shit too back then, right? And it just speaks to also like the narrative that we see when we talk about civil rights, and they show clips, of John Lewis and Reverend C.T. is of them peaceful protests. But what they don't show is that they had folks with rifles, with guns, like even what's her name that got on the bus, Rosa Parks. Even Rosa Parks had a gun, right? But those are narratives that you're not going to hear about because those narratives are dangerous for those who want us to operate a certain way and be peaceful about how we demand things. And so like what I hope that I'm conveying is we are not just connected to HIV, right? We're connected to other intersectionalities. And like I use all of that to influence my work, to center and to ground me. Because I think that's really important. As I said earlier in this broadcast, like don't allow yourself to be pigeonholed, and I will not allow myself to be pigeonholed. So if one day you see me doing a twerk video, just thumbs up, like that video, and yeah, I think did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I believe you covered it. So I'll add my piece around speaking as a form of activism. It is a huge responsibility. The power of giving voice to an oppression, right, and to speak to the oppressor. In calling those things out in order to dismantle it is a huge responsibility. And it also, for me, it requires the speaker to have a clear vision on the world that they want to live in. Our ancestors have had a vision for the world that they want us to live in. They have a vision, an idea of what a world they want their children to live in, what world we want to live in. There's a quote a T-shirt I see a lot and say that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I would not have been here at this position right now to speak had it not been for those who have loved me. Mm-hmm. I point of vulnerability, like I found my uncle's body who passed the HIV. I had a lover in Atlanta who died of HIV. Those folks loved me immensely. I had folks who, so like those stories helped shape my experience. And those experiences help shape the level of my compassion that I have for others who may be in suffering because of their oppression. So for me, the ability to speak is responsible to the legacy of those whose lives have been lost, and not to erase their narrative of struggle and how they struggled. So to carry that into, the future, right? To carry that into where we are now, it's like, okay, cool. What does a world look like where those things don't happen? What does a world look like where we can, like when we think of that world, we have to also envision like what those structures, those systems, those apparatuses look like in order to ensure that we have a system in a world that is healthy, that is liberatory, and can address any oppression if it does show up. The thing is that like oppression could look differently, but we need to make sure that we have like those ones who have experienced oppression, those ones who know intimately the story and the experience of oppression and struggle, to actually be the vanguards, to ensure that oppression doesn't show up in the next iteration of our journey together. So it's very important and critical for me to like be able to like honor those stories and honor those truths and to speak on those things in order for us to create the infrastructure and system that we need to safeguard against oppression in the many ways in which it decides to manifest and show up.
Thank you. There was a lot of power in what you both said, and I'm reminded that empowered speaking also means that we can have empowered silence. And as you were speaking of the friends and family that you saw who died with HIV, I just want to give a moment of silence for them and a moment of silence of everyone who can't be with us on this call today. And I know it might be quite ridiculous to have a moment of silence in a conversation about audio recordings, but I think we have to get used to hearing differently and maybe hearing with not such ableist lenses. So thank you both for sharing your heart and your spirits and everything that you brought into the room today. I'm going to read a little prepared statement, and then Jason, I'm going to invite you to just set up that clip that we're going to watch. Before we do so, I wonder if you just want to say like 1 or 2 words before we go. I want to make sure that you get it out before we say goodbye. Kiara, do you want to go first? Oh, are you frozen? Jason, do you want to, is there anything that you want? Oh, Kiara, are you back?
I don't know, maybe that's getting in the way. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. The thunderstorms are bad.
Yeah, they're refreshing too. I just really want folks out there to understand. Like I'm just thinking about like the dilapidated communities, right? Like I'm thinking about Harlem back in the day when there was a lot of mobilizations to keep Harlem black and keep Harlem like thriving, and people saying like, oh, like, and these were like primarily African Americans saying like, oh, nothing's gonna change. It's gonna always be this way, right? But there were people who are visionaries. They didn't often come from the community. They saw potential, like, for them, but I'm going to say they saw potential, right? And we saw transformation happening. And so I'm saying that to say that is an analogy that we all should be using when people say like, oh, it's impossible. We can't have universal basic income. Oh, like we should not be demanding reallocation of law enforcement. We can demand all that shit and more. And we just have to be visionaries, be consistent, and demand it and expect it.
Jason, last words, and then I'll say my little statement.
Yeah. So I guess like my final thoughts would be yeah, great question. That's a really good question. That I want to go back to the idea of communal, right? Like to be in community, we have to be communal. And what does that look like for us to be in communal community with each other, in order to like help support each other's work and each other's movement, right? I believe that we are all in movement together, and we all, for the most part, want to go the same places. Those who actually are centered in their hearts and their mind and their spirit, right? Those who are not probably won't be there. Like they're not in our movement, right? They're not in movement with us, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's very clear that when we talk about HIV/AIDS movement, when we talk about the movement for drug users, when we talk about the movement for homeless folks, when we talk about the movements for LGBTQ folks, we have to recognize that our movements are intersectional, and we all desire the same thing for ourselves. which is to be healthy and whole. And with that, like that's like for me, that's where the organizing is. That's where the truth telling is. That's where the power lies. And it lies within each other who have the same dream and vision of living in society where we are safe, where we are whole, where we are healthy, where we are sustainable. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much, Kiara and Jason, for taking time to talk to me about activism and direct action and spirits and the sounds of all this work. And thank you everybody for taking a time to listen with the New York City AIDS Memorial. AIDS history is our history and it's our future. Feel free to email us at nycaidsmemorial.org or send us a message on Instagram or Facebook at NYC AIDS Memorial to let us know of any archival audio of video clips of AIDS history that you think we should share. Until then, be well. And we're gonna wrap this up by Jason giving us a little preview or setting up the clip we're about to end on.
It was fun action, really, really not fun moment, right? It was a moment where a pharmaceutical, I want to say he was a Wall Street guy, very rich guy, Martin Shkreli, who bought Daraprim, a drug that was used, essentially a cure to a disease that that you could get from cat feces. I believe it's pronounced toxoplasmosis. I'm not a biochemist. I do not know these things. However, like he bought the rights to these drugs, which was really affordable. It was like $20 something for a 30-day supply. And he raised the prices exponentially because he said I had a functional cure. So it was an extreme case of price gouging. A few years later, someone tried to do the same thing with EpiPens. But it was an action where we saw that folks had access to life-saving treatments and decided to exploit it off the backs of like low-income folks of vulnerable communities. So we did an action, went to his job with a box, a big box that was a kitty litter box with his face at the bottom of it and called him a parasitic turd and poured kitty litter on top of it and just saying like, you are a parasite in our community for this. So here's the clip of the action.
Perfect.
Stop! Stop! Fight back! Fight AIDS!